Spring training is finally here, and we got some news and notes to dig into, some players who are long shots to make the roster that I'm watching very carefully this spring, and some big moves in the AL West. Talk about all that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the Texas Rangers, the first and best daily Rangers podcast. I'm Bryce Patrick, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan, covering this team for 11 seasons, including all 6 as the founder and host of this podcast. Thank you all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If you're not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Patrick. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers. Hit subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform and on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment nearly any single thing below. Now, on today's show, we're talking about 6 players who likely won't make the opening day roster, but I'm still watching very closely this spring training. We got some glorious news and notes straight from the horses' mouths, from Bruce Bochy, from Chris Young to talk about, and a big old move in the AL West. First, let's start with the news and notes. Really just one major update, not even a major update, just one health update whatsoever. Robert Garcia, the left-hand relief pitcher who the Rangers traded for from the Washington Nationals when they sent Nathaniel Lowe over to DC. Garcia is dealing with some nerve irritation in his left forearm, which is his pitching forearm because he is a left-handed pitcher. He is not going to pitch for a couple of days, and then they will see what's going on with all of that. But first day of spring training, like I said on yesterday's show, when pitchers and catchers report, there's nothing really to be learned other than what these players look like in Texas Rangers uniforms and gear, the ones who have not already been in that, and you're really just hoping for no news. And no news is very much for the first couple weeks of spring training, heck, even most of spring training. Honestly, no news is good news. And if this is the only news on day one I always just am at my most hopeful and my most fearful for the news of, oh, hey, this guy is dealing with this thing. Oh, hey, this thing. Oh, hey, well, Anthony Rendon is going to be out for a, quote, long period with his, hip, knee surgery. You'd lose track of the Anthony Rendon injuries. I mean, talk about an inflection point of the Rangers nearly signing Anthony Rendon after that 2019 season, and they didn't. And I was so mad that they didn't. But, oh my goodness. One of the biggest missed bullets dodged that the Rangers could have possibly ever had. One of the worst contracts in Major League Baseball history. But speaking of third basemen who signed massive contracts, I don't think that Bregman is going to be Anthony Rendon, but he signed a 3-year deal worth $120 million to leave the Houston Astros and head to Boston, averaging $40 million average annual value. Right now, the present day value is closer to around $30 million a year. He's got opt-outs after each and every year. But the point is, people were wondering what happened if the Astros brought back Alex Bregman. I guess we'll never know. Been waiting to use that one for a little while. It feels oh so good. Oh, so good. Just get that little dig in there. Now, I bet he will have a decent season in Boston. Another park with a laughably short left field wall where he will continue to get those cheapy home runs pulled over that wall. The wall is a little bit higher in Boston, but very similar to what he's used to in now Daikin Park, no longer Minute Maid, no longer the Juice Box. Shout out to the Cespedes Family Barbacast emailer for calling that the Heat Pump as a new potential nickname for that stadium down there in Houston. But still, I mean, you thought after the trade of Kyle Tucker, after getting Isaac Paredes, after, their infield being completely full, that there was no chance they'd bring back Bregman. But as a hater, one of the first and foremost haters of that Houston Astros franchise, it brings me so much joy to see them lose the guy who they talked very publicly about, saying, we need this guy back. And it just makes their team that much worse. And Bob Nightingale on Twitter talking about how Altuve is still going to play some left field. The talk was if they brought Bregman back, maybe he would play second base. Isaac Paredes would play third. And then Jose Altuve would go to left field, and Altuve said he'd be willing to do so, even though he's never played the outfield in his major league life. But the Astros said, we didn't get Bregman back, but we're still going to do that. I don't know. It's confusing, and it is the team to beat in the AL West that is getting that much worse, trading away one of their best players and letting one of their other best players walk in free agency. I mean, this lineup for Houston is just not nearly as formidable without Alex Bregman in it. I mean, 1 through 5, it's good. Altuve, still very good hitter, getting older. He's heading into his age 35 season. Isaac Paredes, I think, will do very well there as a very right-handed, pull-heavy hitter. Yordan Alvarez, when he's on the field, he's a monster. Christian Walker, very good signing. Yainer Diaz, a very good hitting catcher, but he is a catcher, and predicting their offense is foolhardy. And then, 6 through 9 in their lineup, Jeremy Pena, not a great hitter. Chas McCormick, not a great hitter. Ben Gamble, not a good hitter. Jake Myers, also not a good hitter. So I think the Rangers pretty clearly have the best lineup in the AL West. They're getting just that much worse. It's hard to keep winning at that level for such a long time, especially when you let guys like that walk in free agency, and when you give guys like Jose Abreu that big old contract that they did, and they give you absolutely nothing. Just chef's kiss all around. Happy trails, Alex Bregman. Worst of luck wherever you are. I will be a big old hater till the day I die, because that's just the kind of guy Alex Bregman is. Good guy to have on your team. Incredible guy to hate if he is not on your team. But speaking of your team, the Texas Rangers team, Jacob deGrom has thrown 8 bullpens so far this offseason. He did not throw on the day that pitchers and catchers reported because he threw the day before. We will see him throw again on Friday. So all of that grainy beat writer video that you are so desperately craving to watch, I am also so desperately craving to watch. Grainy beat writer video, or not even grainy, just it's upgraded. The camera phones have upgraded nowadays. I remember back in the day when these beat writers, when cameras on phones were not nearly as good as they are now, so you just see very pixelated pictures, very zoomed in from far away of these guys coming to spring training, and I just live for it. I still do. I mean, I still get chills watching these, Rangers hype videos of we're here, just of, the equipment people packing the truck to go to spring training. I feel very grateful and very blessed that I've been able to work in this industry as long as I have, and I still haven't lost that love for it. Still get so excited to tweet out the dumb things. Baseball season's here as soon as the Super Bowl is done. Still, thankfully, feeling that joy as I do watching all of these little spring training storylines. And one of them is going to be about Kumar Rocker and how he fits into this roster. Evan Grant of the Dallas Morning News was writing about how he thought it was a little similar to Wyatt Langford's situation last year. Chris Young saw it differently. I also see it a bit differently, mainly because Rocker's a lot older. He has already made his big league debut. I mean, he's jumped through the minors really darn quickly, a bunch of different levels incredibly quickly, just like Wyatt Langford. That part is similar. They were both highly touted prospects who were very high draft picks, who have very high expectations. That's all very similar. But with Rocker, we've seen him do it at the big league level. There is more of a shot, more of an opening in the outfield, more of an opening on the roster that I think is more easily filled. There are 5 starting pitcher spots in a rotation, whereas Wyatt Langford, it was seeming like he was just going to DH. We still weren't sure about his defense in the outfield and all of those reps there, and he was still so young and had played so little baseball that you thought, okay, this would be a really big jump. And I don't think that the production from Rocker will be anywhere near what Langford did in spring last year. I don't think it needs to be. I don't think that mattered all that much. I think it was just everybody knew Langford was ready. And I think Rocker is maybe not quite as ready. It's kind of comparable, but when Chris Young was asked about if those situations were similar, this is what he had to say. He said, quote, "I think our pitching options are significantly different than where we were with our outfield options last year. We're excited about Kumar. We think he has the opportunity to make our team, and we're going to see how it goes. We'll see who's healthy and how guys have thrown the ball, but he's certainly one pitcher who is in our plans. Can't tell you exactly how at this point." Now, all of that is very much GM speak, very saying things without saying things. Very obvious about, we think that this is different. We think that Rocker is good. Of course they do. That's duh they do. The only thing for me that's significant, that's even interesting, is the final sentence. Can't tell you exactly how at this point. We're going to talk about what exactly he means by that and why that piqued my curiosity. As in addition to 6 different guys who probably aren't going to make the Rangers roster on opening day, but I'm still going to be watching really darn closely this spring training. All that and more right after this. This show is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1-ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fueled fuller and longer. Personally, I love the no-shells variety. It's the perfect grab-and-go snack for busy days. Whenever I'm snacking at my desk, on a road trip, or just need a quick protein boost, they are always my go-to. And if you love cracking open every shell for the satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. So get crackin' and get snackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Shout out to the everydayers making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. We'll be back on tomorrow's show talking about JT Chargois, why he is a little bit more interesting than the couple of sentences I said about him when the Rangers signed him to a minor league deal in yesterday's show. Now, let's look at the 6 different... Actually, one last little bit of news from the mouth of big man in charge of the whole shindig, Chris Young, about these pitchers and catchers reporting. Just some very good overall news that everybody outside of Robert Garcia is in fact ahead of schedule, or if you're British or feeling nasty, schedule. Just a delightful little bit to hear that Jacob deGrom feels good, that Nathan Eovaldi feels good. All of these different pitchers, I'm really hoping that all the starting pitchers are healthy heading into opening day, that all of them are built up, ready for a full workload of a full season, and that everything just finally breaks the Rangers' way, injury luck-wise, for their pitching staff, just for 1 year in the history of baseball. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, but just for now, I think we should savor and enjoy the fact that every pitcher outside of literally just one is doing as well as we hoped they would. Now, let's get into these 6 guys. Some of them are non-roster invitees. Some of them are just 40-man roster guys. Some of them are very deep in the minor leagues, but I am very excited to watch these 6 guys, even though I'd say at the highest chance of any of these guys of making the roster is, I don't know, maybe 30% at most. Let's talk about this first guy, Sebastian Walcott. You may have heard of him. The Rangers' top prospect, one of the top prospects in all of baseball, the Bahamian shortstop / third baseman / maybe eventually outfielder who is just 18 years old for another month or so. I think it's about almost exactly a month until he turns 19 years old. He will start the season in AA with the Frisco Rough Riders, where he ended last season. This kid is just so freaking good at baseball. He's just so incredibly talented. He got a little bit of a look last year in spring training. I think he might have gotten into 1 or 2 Major League spring training games. I don't think we'll see all that much of him in spring training games this year, but I think we'll see more than 2 or 3 or however many. I think it was fewer than 15 at-bats he got in Major League spring training camp last year, but he's just so talented. I'm curious to see how he holds his own facing off against big leaguers. I think he'll be up for the challenge. I think he will, probably have a couple of at-bats where he will swing through some really good quality breaking stuff that's way out of the zone. He will probably also have some at-bats where he just demolishes baseballs, because this guy puts up crazy high exit velocities. And we'll see what he looks like at shortstop. I think this guy is a legit shortstop. His raw power is probably his best tool, so we could end up seeing some just massive mammoth home runs from him, maybe 1 or 2 this spring training. I would really Love to see that. And also his bazooka cannon arm. Not bazooka feels like I'm underselling how powerful this arm is. It's an ICBM of a right arm, uncorking those throws from shortstop or third base, or maybe if he gets a little bit bigger, eventually the outfield. It doesn't really matter where. This kid is just so young and so talented. Seeing him against big leaguers in the box will be just such a fun experience. There's, I think, less than zero shot that he makes the big league roster, and he shouldn't. He shouldn't. He's played 15 games at AA. That's an insane jump. Even for a kid as talented as this, you're going to see him in Frisco for at least the first couple of months, and unless he's hitting like 400, probably the first 3-4 months of the season, he'll be in AA. Maybe he'll spend a little bit of time in AAA. If everything goes absolutely perfectly like he wants, he will be making his big league debut as a 19-year-old. That is what he has said is his goal, is to make the big leagues as a teenager before his 20th birthday, which will be in March of 2026, because he is a child. But a child that is a grown man and very freaking good at baseball. And I cannot wait to see what he's going to do in spring training and just how many games he's even going to get into. Number 2 guy who I think has the best chance to make the Rangers opening day roster of these guys, but I still don't think that's a high probability. Not because I don't believe in this guy, but of course, you probably can assume I am talking about Jack Leiter. I don't think he's going to make this opening day roster. I think he is going to stick as a starting pitcher, and that is what he should do. He should probably go back to AAA for a little bit. But of the outcomes of all these guys that are fighting for some of those final roster spots, I think for me, I don't know what to expect. How much better Jack Leiter's gotten in the offseason from where he was at the end of last season. I mean, where he was at the end of last season, he just wasn't quite good enough to be a rotation player for the Rangers. It just wasn't good enough to be a starting pitcher in a rotation for a team competing for an AOS title and hopefully a World Series championship. A second World Series championship for the franchise. Now, eventually, maybe Jack Leiter ends up moving to a bullpen role. Maybe he just can't get those secondary offerings, the curveball, the slider, the changeup, the cutter. He just can't end up throwing those enough for strikes to keep guys off of his fastball, and so he just becomes a reliever. A really nasty one, but a reliever nonetheless. I hope that won't be the case for him, or maybe because of the way baseball is nowadays, he'll be more of a multi-inning reliever. Guys who, combine, who are not just, mop-up men, but actually intentionally guys who will go and give you 2-3 innings, who aren't quite starters, aren't quite relievers. I think we'll see more of that in Major League Baseball. I think that's more of the role that maybe Chris Young was hinting at for Kumar Rocker when he said, we can't tell you exactly how Rocker is going to fit in to the roster at this point. For Rocker, maybe that's the way that they limit his innings and try and build him back up, because he hasn't pitched 100 innings since his final year of college. That was a while ago. That was 2021, if my memory is serving me. Yes, 2021, because Jack Leiter was the Rangers' first-round pick in 2021. Then he spent that year in the Frontier Wilderness, the Frontier League, I should say, before he got drafted by the Rangers. Kumar Rocker, that is, in 2022. And then building him back up in kind of these, he won't start and go 5 innings and throw 150 to 180 innings this year. It's a way to limit him. And then if he is still fully healthy and fully all good, built up, all that good stuff, he'll be in the starting rotation towards the back end of the year. We'll see what that looks like for Rocker and Leiter. I think they could have similar paths, similar roles this year in kind of doing a piggyback, tandem starter kind of thing. One spot through the rotation. You have 2 of these guys, each of them giving you about 3 or maybe 4 innings, depending on how things go. But Leiter, I am very, very curious to watch, curious to see what he worked on this offseason, what he comes into camp looking like, and what he's working on this spring training. I think this guy still has very good potential to be a mid-rotation starting pitcher or one of the nastiest relievers in the league. Either one of those options helps this Rangers team, I think, definitely in the short term and in the long term. You hope that he's a starting pitcher, but even if he's not, I think this kid is incredibly talented, and I am so excited to see what he is going to do in this spring training, and if he even does make the Raiders camp out of out of opening day. Coming up, we're going to talk about 4 more guys that I'm really interested to watch, including another hitter whose chances are a big long shot, but I'm still really excited to see what he's going to do in Surprise, Arizona. All that and more right after this. Shout out to the Aviators making Locked On Rangers your first visit every single day. I'll be back on Monday. Again, 5 shows a week. We are back to baseball season, talking about what we learned over the weekend from this Rangers squad. Now, the number 3 player I am looking forward to watching, who's probably not going to make the opening day roster. Maybe he will. Maybe Church has a better chance of making the opening day roster than Jack Leiter. But that's right. I'm talking about Marc Church, the slider specialist, the fastball, I don't know, I have no alliteration for fastball aficionado. Not quite there, but, we're workshopping it. But Marc Church is a guy who I thought was going to make the Rangers bullpen out of camp last year. And he looked like one of the most impressive pitchers on that roster in the bullpen, and just missed most of the season due to injury. Made his big league debut on game 162. 1 shutout inning, 1 single allowed, 1 strikeout. The big league debut is over. Marc Church is a big leaguer, and he will be a big leaguer again at some point this season. Whether that's on the opening day roster or whether that's later on, I'm just really excited to see what Marc Church looks like in spring, how healthy he is, because this is going to be a guy who I think will be a big player in this Rangers pen, for several years. This is a guy who sits in the fastball in the mid-90s. He has just one of the nastier sliders in all of the minor leagues. One of the nastier sliders in this system. I think this is a guy who can go. He's a guy who can go multiple innings. He's a guy who I think will play a role in this Rangers bullpen, whether that's to open the season, whether that's more in the middle of the season or later on in this season. Just getting him healthy and seeing what he looks like, I think, is important, and I'm really excited to see, how they debut him, how he looks in spring, and how they talk about, when he's going to get to the big leagues, when he's going to get back to the big leagues. Now, the number 4 guy on this list, Emiliano Teodo, guy who was on the Rangers' top 10 prospects pretty universally. I believe I had him at 6 in my top 30 Rangers prospects, a guy who pitched a little bit in spring training last year. I thought would pitch more in Rangers big league spring training last year, but when he pitched, he looked really darn good. And this year, I'd imagine he's going to get, a decent look. He's probably going to stay starting. He's probably going to go to AAA to start. And we'll see how long he lasts there as a starting pitcher, how long the Rangers keep him down there, or if the Rangers just decide to say, hey, you could help this bullpen right now as one of the best relievers in this pen. A guy with nasty stuff who sits in the upper 90s, routinely touches 100, has touched as high as 104 on the gun, has a very, very nasty slurve, not slider, not curve, a slurve, which he can manipulate into a bunch of different shapes, a bunch of different velocities, and he uses that really darn effectively. If that changeup can be a decent third pitch for him, or I guess kind of 4th, 5th, whatever pitch, however many pitches you count the breaking ball as. And, switching to that 2-seamer made him be much more effective. When he was throwing the 4-seamer, it was, hard, but it was straight. Now he throws the 2-seamer, and it's got some movement on it, and it's still a very, very high velocity coming out of his hands. He just still has some issues staying in the strike zone, even if he's a reliever. I mean, his walk rates are worrying for someone in pitching in any big league games. Big league hitters are just too good. They recognize the strike zone too well that if you're that wild, you're just not going to be effective. I think he can get there to be an effective, reliever, maybe an effective starter. We'll see exactly what all of that looks like, but I'm sure we're going to get a decent amount of looks at Emiliano Teodo in spring training, and he's a guy who I'm watching very closely because he will be a part of this many Rangers squads in the next few years. I'd imagine that he makes his big league debut at some point this year. I think it's most likely that he moves into the pen and becomes a really, really nasty reliever that throws in the triple-digit range, which the Rangers, I don't know that they have anybody in their pen right now that hits triple digits. I don't think that's the case. I think the only person on this roster that's going to make the opening day roster that can hit triple digits will be Jacob deGrom. maybe Rocker if he makes the roster. I don't think that he has hit triple digits in the minors, but he's shown flashes of it at points. I think he's definitely sat in the 98 range. I think he has. Maybe my memory is just not remembering. It's spring training for podcasters too, but I'm really excited to see what Emiliano Teodo is going to look like. Next guy on this list is a guy who has been on the podcast. Allan Trejo, the shortstop / second baseman / third baseman who has spent all of his big league career to this point with the Colorado Rockies, was DFA'd last year, then spent some time in AAA with the Dodgers. With the Rangers, having such depth in the middle infield, I mean, it's a real long shot for Trejo to make this major league roster, especially after they signed Nick Ahmed, who I think is, I don't know, I'd take Allan Trejo. I'm more interested in what Allan Trejo will do this spring training than I am in Nick Ahmed. I know that Nick Ahmed's glove is, big league capable, but his bat is just bad. It's not good. And Trejo had a really bad offensive season last year, even in a hitter-friendly park in Colorado. But again, I don't think that the Rockies development staff is the best to get the most out of players and their capabilities. I know that he learned quite a few things with the Dodgers, and I'm sure that signing with Texas, he knew. We talked about it. Like, you're a middle infielder. The Rangers have a middle infield pretty well locked up. They spent $500 million on it in Marcus Semien, in Corey Seager. They also have backups in Josh Smith, who should have been an all-star last year, was a silver slugger as a utility player. They also have Zeke Duran. They also have Jonathan Ornelas, who is a big league capable bench glove right now, and Trejo just wants to be a part of this club, a team that believes in him as a shortstop. Maybe he'll just end up spending a lot of the year in AAA Round Rock, but I'm excited to see what the Rangers can get out of him. He's a good dude. I'm rooting for him to make this roster. We'll see if that happens. But even if it's not with Texas, I think that this guy will be back in the big leagues at some point in this season, and I'm excited to see what he does this spring. Now, the last guy on this list, yet another pitcher. There's so many pitchers. This is a guy who is already on the 40-man roster. That is Winston Santos. Now, last year was a great start to the season for Winston Santos. Not as great in the back half, still pretty darn good. He is still rather young. He made it all the way to AA with the Texas Rangers last year. He was the breakout story in terms of starting pitchers in the first half of the season. He was just so darn good with Hickory, and he made those big steps forward. Always had a really, really good fastball, but the slider took that step forward, and I was so excited for him. It made me more a believer in him as a starting pitcher than just a guy who will probably end up in the pen. Maybe he does still end up in that pen, but in the first half of the season, in 12 games with Hickory, he had a 2.80 ERA, 64 and a third innings, 81 strikeouts, fewer than 3 walks per 9, over 11 Ks per 9, and that was the same rate as he had in Frisco. He's 22 years old, 23-year-old season this year. He had over 11 Ks per 9 with Frisco and under 3 walks per 9, again, with Frisco, but got bit a bit by the long ball, 1.6 home runs per 9, a 4.89 ERA in 10 games, 10 starts with Frisco, 46 innings, averaging fewer than 5 innings per start. A couple of those blow-up starts, but I'm excited to watch him in person in Frisco this year. I didn't get to see him in any of his 10 starts last year, but this is a guy who I think this year, by the end of the season, could be making his big league debut. He has been a guy who has been touted for quite some time. I'm really interested to see what that fastball looks like against big league hitters. I think it is already good enough. I'm interested to see how much that slider's progression last year is going to keep progressing, because if it becomes a plus pitch, having those 2 plus pitches, and the changeup seems to be, if it can be fringe average to average, that's a big league starter. That's a guy who could go in the middle of a big league rotation. Again, we've seen what it's like to have a guy with a good fastball that doesn't quite trust the breaking stuff or can't get hitters to respect the breaking stuff or secondary stuff enough. I see that in Jack Leiter. Santos is similar in that he's got a really good fastball. The velocity for Jack is just a little bit higher, but both of them They have good deliveries, they have good deception, they have good, movement, all of the things that you want on a fastball. Both these guys have really, really darn good fastballs. It's not just the velocity, it's the shape of it, it's the everything about it. And you need to have multiple pitches. Unless you're Mariano Rivera, unless you're Emmanuel Clase, even Clase has multiple pitches. But if you're throwing a 102-mile-an-hour cutter, then you don't really need a whole lot of other pitches still. Every once in a while you need, he needs to throw that slider or a four-seamer to make people respect the cutter, whatever, more. But Santos is a guy who I really like, had a good year last year, almost certainly not going to make the big league roster. I think there's just a 0% chance that he makes the opening day roster, but I think he will be a big leaguer by season's end, and I'm curious to see what his first look at big league hitters is going to look like, even in the spring. That's going to do it for today's show. Thank you all so much for listening and subscribing, and until next time, don't forget to enjoy baseball.